It's great to be part of GTE again, and looking forward to sharing some of the information that we discovered while we were out on the road on the 2021 Pro Farmer Crop Tour last week. And a big thanks to the U.S. Soy and USAC, of course, for partnering with Pro Farmer to bring you the 2021 crop tour. That was a great experience. This was the 29th year of the Pro Farmer Crop Tour, and it started back in the late 70s as part of the Illinois Farm Bureau. It was then run by a private crop consultant who we worked with for a short period of time before Pro Farmers started running the crop tour in 1993. We've been running it ever since, and the total number of samples that we pull, the look that we get at the Midwest corn and soybean crops expands on an annual basis. This year, we pulled just over 1,700 samples of corn. We pulled nearly 1,700 soybean samples. So we were in about 3,400 fields from Ohio to South Dakota and down into South Central Illinois. So we're taking a look at about 75% of the U.S. corn crop and about 70% of the U.S. soybean crop when we cover those areas. So it is a widespread objective look at the yield potential that is out there. I do want to make note that when we are out there on the road, what we are doing is we are taking a look at corn yields. We are sampling corn yields while we are on the road, but we are counting soybean pods. And the reason that there's a difference is because it's so difficult to estimate soybean yields at this time of the year that we feel like what we really need to do is take a look at how much of the production factory is up and running and able to produce soybeans for this fall's harvest. We count pods. We do not count the number of beans inside of the pod. And that's something that from year to year might vary a little bit, but typically the average is going to be about 2.5 beans per pod. So we make the assumption that it's going to be close to that one more time. And that number maybe will creep a bit higher in a good year, fall back a little bit in a tough year. But in a year like this, when we went out on the road knowing that we were going to see two completely different crops from the Eastern Belt to the Western Belt, our belief is that one side will even out with the other, and we'll end up with about 2.5 beans per pod across the Corn Belt. As I said, we expected that we would see two different crops when we were out there on the road, and that's what we saw. And I want to start over in the Eastern Corn Belt with Ohio. As you can see, the Ohio corn yield estimate came in at just over 185 bushels per acre, and the pod counts in a 3x3 foot square, just over 1,195, which gives me a good opportunity to explain something about pod counts. There's a sweet spot on pod counts that correlates to yield, and that sweet spot is 1,150. The reason that we can say that is because we've got 28 years of history behind the crop tour that proves 1,150 pods is that sweet spot. Above 1,150 pods per 3x3 foot square, it doesn't mean that you're pulling yield down, but you do get diminishing returns above 1,150 pods in a 3x3 foot square. Below 1,150, then maybe, just maybe, depending on what state you're in, because it varies from state to state, but below 1,150 pods, maybe that bean crop could have done more. and we could see more of the soybean production factory up and running to help that soybean yield out. So Ohio coming in at 1,195, that's a very good number. And with the amount of moisture that is generally available in the state, there are some dry areas that we need to be aware of. But with the amount of moisture that is generally available, we feel like that bean crop is going to go ahead and finish. Ohio is a hit and miss state. And this year it feels like Ohio hit, both on corn and on soybeans. Let's move to Indiana. Just almost 193.5 for the corn yield and 1,239.7 on the pods in a 3x3 foot square. The central part of the state has turned very dry, has experienced one of the driest periods in history for August. That suggests that that central part of Indiana, maybe the bean size is going to be slightly reduced, but there's been good rain in the northern part of the state, and we feel like one is going to offset the other. It's a little bit high. I know that sounds strange to hear, but it's a little bit high on the pod counts. But generally speaking, I feel like we've got a really good bean crop in Indiana. I know the corn crop is good. It just needs to be able to get to the finish line. The maturity of the corn crop in Ohio and Indiana is such that some late season rain now, between now and Labor Day, will help finish off that crop. Soybeans obviously would benefit from some additional rain. Over to Illinois, 196.3 for the state average corn yield, 1,280 for the pods in a 3x3 foot square. Pro Farmer editor Brian Grady directs the eastern leg of the Pro Farmer Crop Tour. He was impressed with the corn crop, but as impressed as he was with the corn crop, he was even more impressed with that soybean crop. Said that it's the best soybean crop that he's ever seen in the state of Illinois. And Brian's been over there doing it for about 20 years. So it's a very impressive bean crop, good color. And this, I will say generally about the Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio bean crop is that relatively disease-free, at least in the third week of August when we were there taking a snapshot, relatively disease-free, weed pressure relatively light, and insect pressure basically non-existent. So with the value of the crop, it appears that farmers ramped up their management and their crop protection this year and did everything that they possibly could to make sure that if it was going to build a yield, they were going to give it the protection that it needed to hold on to the yield that it could make. Over to Iowa, 191 for the corn yield, just over 1,200 pods in a 3x3 foot square. Great variability, extreme variability in the Iowa corn and soybean crops. Northern Iowa has some real drought issues that we have been dealing with. The central part of the state, especially west central Iowa, seems to be in great condition. East central Iowa, don't forget, we are recovering from the derecho damage that we experienced a year ago. And there's some hangover on the production side as far as what it means as far as how well that corn and soybean crop is going to produce this year. So a bit of a hangover there that we need to be aware of. There could be a bit of a drag in last year's derecho area. The soybean crop, western Iowa, it's a little messy. There's a little bit too much weed pressure for me to be comfortable with that crop over there. But generally speaking, a good bean crop, just not a great bean crop. Now, I wanted to hop over here to South Dakota, over on the right side of the screen. The corn yield came in at 151.5 for the state corn yield, just under 1,000 pods in a 3x3 foot square in South Dakota. Drought. And we were in the best part of South Dakota, in the southeast part of the state. The bean crop just didn't get everything that it needed early in the season to build that good big pod count. We were down about 20% on pods from where we were a year ago. So that South Dakota bean crop is going to be off from a year ago. It's going to be off a bit from the 3-year average, but definitely off from last year. And as I said, we were in the good spot. We were in the good spot of South Dakota. Nebraska, just over 182 bushels per acre on corn, pod count of just over 1,225 in a 3x3 foot square. It's a good Nebraska crop, but there have been years in the not so distant past that it was difficult to tell the difference between an irrigated cornfield and the dryland cornfields. Heck, it was hard to tell the difference of on the pivot fields, in the pivot irrigation fields, the difference between the irrigated and the corners where it's not irrigated. This year, there's a stark difference between irrigated and dryland corn. The irrigated corn is good, not great. The dryland corn is dryland corn. It's a little better than what you might expect from dryland corn in Nebraska, but we didn't count a lot of 50 or 60 bushel, get a lot of 50 or 60 bushel yield estimates. Most of the dryland corn was in the 120 to 150 bushel range. Whereas in some of the recent years, we've been as high as 160, 170 bushel on some of the dryland corn. It's just not there. The bean crop, it's average. More than half of the bean crop that we sampled was irrigated. And that tells me that they can flip the switch and make a so-so bean crop a good bean crop in Nebraska on short notice. And finally, in Minnesota, 177.4 for a state average corn yield, just over 1,025 pods in a 3x3 foot square. Dry conditions across the state really put a cap on that bean crop's ability to add pods and to build yield. So with all of that in mind and taking into consideration crop conditions outside of the tour area, ProFarmer delivered a corn crop estimate of 15.116 billion bushels with an average yield of 177 bushels per acre. We do put a plus or minus 1% on that. That would make the crop 15.267 down to 14.965. That is a bit higher than USDA estimated in its August crop production report, but it's not an overwhelming crop for the amount of demand that we've got coming into the market. Soybeans, 4.436 billion bushels, national average bean yield of 51.2 bushels per acre. We take a plus or minus 2% on the soybeans, which would give us a crop of 4.525 down to 4.347 billion bushels. Again, it's a bit higher than what USDA estimated in August, but with the amount of demand that we are dealing with in this bean market on the export front and on the domestic front, it's not an overwhelming crop that all of the sudden is going to end up in bulging carryover, bulging supplies. So it feels like a well-balanced situation for the 2021-22 marketing year.